the late-night scribbles. The hum of the fluorescent tubes underscored Alastair Davis's despair. Scattered coffee containers, remnants of his vigil, cluttered the desk like fallen dominoes. On the whiteboard, equations swam before him, each symbol a taunt. The Riemann hypothesis. It had been his white whale for years, a complex siren call, and tonight it remained teasingly out of reach, a will-o'-the-wisp. He rubbed his gritty eyes, the discomfort a constant reminder of the relentless hours. A brief respite beckoned, a walk, a shift in perspective. He pushed away from the desk, the chair's screech slicing the otherwise hushed corridor. As he left his office, a delicate scratching sound drifted to him. It possessed a rhythm, almost a trance, like a pen relentlessly scoring paper. Or perhaps chalk on a whiteboard? Intrigued, Alastair traced the sound. It guided him down the dim corridor, past silent offices and bolted classrooms, until he reached the communal whiteboard at the far end, typically a haven for student study groups. There, illuminated by the ghostly green of the emergency exit sign, stood Mr. Peabody, the night custodian. Chalk dust dusted his dark uniform, resembling a flurry of powdered snow. But it wasn't the man's presence that arrested Alastair. It was the content of the board. Equations, yes, but not the simple arithmetic one might anticipate. These were intricate, elegant constructs, replete with Greek letters, integrals, and symbols Alastair hadn't encountered since his doctoral work. The whiteboard became a canvas of mathematical art, a numerical ballet that swirled before Alastair's vision. Oblivious, Mr. Peabody etched away, his brow knotted in concentration. The scratching filled the still air, a testament to singular focus. Alastair observed, utterly captivated, as the janitor populated the board with line after line of sophisticated calculations. Alastair cleared his throat, the sound amplifying in the quiet. Mr. Peabody recoiled, nearly losing his grip on the chalk. He whirled around, surprise flashing across his face as he recognized Alastair. A self-conscious air quickly replaced the initial shock. "Professor Davis, I didn't know anyone was still here," he mumbled, his voice a soft rumble. Alastair was momentarily speechless, his mind struggling to process the spectacle before him. "Mr. Peabody, what exactly is all of this?" He gestured weakly at the whiteboard. Mr. Peabody shuffled, his gaze falling to the floor. "Just scribbling, sir. Nothing of importance." He reached for a cleaning cloth, as if to obliterate any trace of his nocturnal pursuits. "Scribbling?" Alastair echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. "Mr. Peabody, those aren't mere scribbles. That's high-level calculus, differential equations. Some of this is reminiscent of—" He paused, examining the equations again. "Elliptic curve cryptography." Mr. Peabody ceased his action, his shoulders slumping. He sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "It seems the truth is out, isn't it?" Alastair moved closer, his thoughts racing. He noticed connections, subtle relationships within the equations that hinted at genuine insight. "Where did you acquire this knowledge, Mr. Peabody?" He hesitated, then spoke, his voice barely audible. I once studied mathematics, sir. Before life took a different turn." "Studied mathematics?" Alastair pressed, his curiosity now fully ignited. "Where? What level of study?" "I attended MIT for a year, with a full ride," Mr. Peabody confessed, still avoiding eye contact. "But family issues forced me to withdraw. I never completed my degree." Alastair struggled to reconcile the humble janitor with the advanced theorems adorning the whiteboard. "And you've been doing this, resolving equations, all this time?" Mr. Peabody offered a slow nod. "It helps me to process, keeps my intellect engaged." He risked a glance at Alastair, a spark of vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "Please, sir, don't mention this to anyone. I wouldn't want any complications." Alastair studied him, a strange blend of incredulity and respect growing within him. Here was a mind, a brilliant mathematician concealed beneath layers of obscurity and circumstance. "Complications? Mr. Peabody, this is hardly a complication. This is extraordinary. He paused, then posed the question that had been nagging at him. Are you acquainted with the Riemann hypothesis? Mr. Peabody's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Of course. It's been an abiding fascination for many years. He paused, then added almost casually, I believe I might have an approach. A jolt ran through Alastair. An approach? To the Riemann hypothesis? From the night janitor? It seemed preposterous, impossible. Yet, studying the board, the interwoven logic, the sheer elegance, Alastair couldn't write it off. Demonstrate. Alastair urged, his voice hushed. Show me your approach. Mr. Peabody finally met Alastair's gaze. A flicker of excitement ignited within them, a spark of a long-subdued passion. He picked up the chalk, his hand trembling slightly. Well, he began, a faint smile playing on his lips. It begins with this. And he returned to writing. The scratching resumed, no longer a monotonous drone, but a vibrant symphony of mathematical promise. A hidden mind. The scrape of Alastair's throat cut through the immense hall, amplified by a silence so profound it felt almost manufactured. Startled, Mr. Peabody, teetering atop a wheeled ladder, reacted as if struck. A plume of chalk dust erupted with each frantic swipe of his eraser, a small, spectral cloud against the still dark windows. Mr. Peabody? Alastair tried again, edging closer. The sterile tang of disinfectant battled the sharp, arid bite of chalk. Peabody stilled, back like a ramrod, then slowly pivoted, eraser clutched like a lifeline. His face, a landscape of flitting emotions, betrayed surprise, mortification, and a flicker of something akin to dread. His eyes, normally bright with contained amusement, were shadowed with anxiety. Professor Davis, he mumbled, voice a gravelly whisper. I wasn't expecting anyone so early. Alastair indicated the whiteboard with a vague gesture, its surface bearing witness to Peabody's frantic efforts. That's quite a demolition job. Peabody's Adam's apple danced nervously. Just keeping things shipshape, sir. Ensuring a clean slate for your lectures. He offered a wan smile, but it lacked any real warmth. Alastair, though socially inept, wasn't blind. The excuse reeked of fabrication. Mr. Peabody, he began carefully, I glimpsed what was there. The color leached from Peabody's face, leaving him ashen. He resembled nothing so much as a child caught raiding the sweets jar. It's inconsequential, Professor. Mea ides scriptis. The hours can be long. He made another futile pass at the board, smearing the remnants into a blurred tapestry. Alastair drew nearer, his gaze tracing the surviving fragments. Familiar symbols began to resolve themselves, an elegant ballet of equations that resonated with him far more eloquently than conversation ever could. He noted a certain grace in the notation, a unique perspective he hadn't encountered before. A particularly intricate sequence snagged his attention. His brow creased in concentration. It was a fresh assault on the problem. This isn't mere scribbling, Mr. Peabody, Alastair stated, his voice gaining a sharp edge. This is sophisticated work. Highly sophisticated. He reached out, fingers hovering above the dusty surface. Is it a variation on the Dirichlet L function? Peabody remained mute, his gaze fixed on the floorboards, his frame seeming to collapse in on itself. Oblivious to Peabody's discomfort, Alastair was already lost in the abstract panorama. He saw the potential, the tantalizing hint of a novel approach to the Riemann hypothesis, a path he'd overlooked. The integration of the prime counting function. Alastair murmured, his thoughts spinning. It's inspired. He looked up at Peabody, eyes bright with a confluence of awe and fervent excitement. This is ingenious, Mr. Peabody. Peabody recoiled at the word ingenious, as if slapped. Please, Professor, he breathed, barely audible. Don't make a scene. It's just nonsense. He darted a nervous glance around, as if fearful of eavesdroppers. Finally registering Peabody's agitation, Alastair stepped back, comprehension dawning. Peabody wasn't concealing something trivial. He was concealing a part of himself, a hidden talent he felt ashamed to expose. Mr. Peabody, Alastair amended, softening his tone. Why haven't you mentioned you were a mathematician? Peabody evaded his gaze. I'm no mathematician, professor. I'm a custodian. But this, Alastair gestured towards the board. This is the craft of a mathematician, and a gifted one at that. Where did you learn this? Peabody sighed, a sound filled with weary resignation. A lifetime ago, he mumbled. Before life intervened. Alastair pressed him gently. Where? Mit Peabody confessed in a Vispa. I was a student there. Ages ago. Alastair stared, dumbfounded. I'm mit alumnus? Working as a janitor? It defied logic. Yet the equations, their inherent elegance and novel perspective, spoke volumes. This wasn't the work of an amateur. This was someone who grasped the deep architecture of mathematics. Alastair recalled the countless hours he'd dedicated to the Riemann hypothesis, the dead ends and the frustrating setbacks. And now, bathed in pre-dawn gloom, in a deserted corridor, lay a potential solution, conceived by the most unlikely of minds. A buzzing excitement filled his head. He needed to know more. He had to understand Peabody's methodology. This could be the breakthrough he'd been chasing. Mr. Peabody, he uttered, his voice charged with a sudden urgency. I need to grasp this. Will you explain it to me? Coffee and confessions. Mr. Peabody, Davis began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with hesitation. Care to join me for coffee? He inclined his head toward the corner, where a forlorn Mr. Coffee unit stood guard over teetering journal stacks and abandoned granola bars. Peabody, still clutching the damp cloth, blinked in surprise. Coffee, Professor? I wouldn't want to be a bother. Davis brushed off the concern with a wave. Don't be absurd. It's on me. Besides, a spark of his earlier zeal reignited in his eyes. I have a few questions that are best discussed over caffeine. A moment of inner debate flickered across Peabody's face before he offered a slow nod. Very well, Professor. Thank you. Davis turned to the coffee machine, the metallic clamor and throaty gurgle filling the confined space. He spooned a scandalous amount of sugar into his mug, a shameful habit he couldn't seem to shake. Offering the bowl to Peabody, he raised a silent question. Peabody declined with a gentle shake of his head, accepting his mug with a soft murmur of gratitude. Silence descended, broken only by the coffee maker's measured dripping. Davis perched precariously on the edge of his desk. Peabody remained rooted near the doorway, poised for flight. So, Davis finally ventured, taking a generous swallow of his brew. Those equations on the chalkboard. A sigh escaped Peabody, heavy with resignation. I must apologize, Professor. I was merely blowing off some steam. It won't recur. Apologize? Why on earth would you apologize? It was remarkable, Mr. Peabody. Truly. Davis leaned forward, his gaze sharp and intent. That particular approach to the Riemann hypothesis, unorthodox, doesn't even begin to cover it. But it's captivating. Utterly captivating. Peabody fidgeted. It's nothing, Professor. Just idle doodles. Idle doodles involving advanced number theory and complex analysis? Surely you jest, Mr. Peabody. I may be many things, but I am not naive. Finally, Peabody settled into the threadbare armchair across from Davis's desk, perching as if afraid of sinking in. He placed his mug gingerly on the floor. It's a rather involved story, Professor. Time is one thing I have, Davis replied, his eyes unwavering. Peabody inhaled deeply. I used to be a student, up at MIT. Mathematics. Davis's eyebrows climbed a fraction, but he remained silent, encouraging Peabody onward. I was consumed, Professor. An obsession, truly. Mathematics was my singular focus, all I ever craved. I thrived. I absorbed knowledge like a sponge. My very dreams took the form of equations. A faint smile ghosted across his face, a fleeting glimpse of a youthful, more vibrant self. And then, Davis prompted softly. The smile vanished. Life intervened, Professor. My father became ill, terribly ill. The medical costs spiraled out of control. My mother, she couldn't bear it. I was forced to withdraw from school. To find work. Any work. He glanced down at his hands, roughened and worn by labor. This position was the only one available. In mathematics? Davis asked, his voice barely audible. It persisted, Professor. A constant companion. A craving that never abated. Peabody looked up, his eyes reflecting a deep well of sorrow. I attempted to stay current, reading journals, working on problems in my off hours. But it's not the same. It's more difficult, and ultimately futile. A long silence followed, as Davis absorbed Peabody's history. He saw not just a custodian, but a brilliant intellect constrained by circumstance, stifled by unrealized potential. He recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood both the allure and the agony of the mathematical universe. Futile, Davis countered, his tone regaining some of its characteristic edge. Mathematics is never futile, Mr. Peabody. Never. He rose and began to pace with restless energy. You possess a gift, a remarkable gift, and you're squandering it scrubbing floors. Peabody visibly winced. I'm not squandering it, Professor. I'm earning a wage. I'm providing for my family's necessities. But at what expense? Davis ceased his pacing and faced Peabody directly, his gaze burning with an intensity Peabody hadn't witnessed before. At the expense of your own fulfillment? At the expense of your own potential contributions? Can't you recognize, Mr. Peabody? You have the capacity to contribute something significant, something important. Peabody lowered his gaze to the floor once more, his shoulders slumping further. That ship has sailed, Professor. I'm past my prime. Too rusty. Nonsense, Davis scoffed. Age is a mere construct. And practice, well, that's easily rectified. An idea began to germinate in Davis's mind. A plan, a possibility taking shape. He could feel a familiar surge of excitement coursing through him. Mr. Peabody, he announced, his voice resonating with renewed resolve. I believe we need to discuss how we can remedy this situation. Secret lessons. The following Tuesday, as the last students trickled out of his advanced calculus and differential equations class, Professor Davis remained rooted to his spot, gazing out the window. The autumn leaves were surrendering to gravity in a flurry of crimson and gold, a visual spectacle he barely registered. He was contemplating the appropriate moment to approach Mr. Peabody. He cleared his throat, adjusted his spectacles, and gathered the stack of textbooks he had carefully selected. Mr. Peabody, he called out as the custodian began his nightly rounds, dustpan in hand. A moment of your time, if you please. Peabody, ever the obliging employee, paused his sweeping. Of course, Professor. Davis gestured to the books. I thought, perhaps you might find these stimulating. He thrust the stack towards Peabody, nearly losing his grip. They're a bit beyond the introductory level, naturally, but given your evident aptitude. Peabody's eyes widened slightly as he took the books. Titles like Non-Euclidean Geometry and Partial Differential Equations were clearly visible. He ran a calloused hand over the cover of Principia Mathematica, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. Professor, I don't know what to say. Say you'll put them to good use, Davis blurted out, then immediately regretted his forwardness. That is, if you have the inclination. Peabody smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Thank you, Professor. I assure you I do. That evening, after the library had closed and the last of the students had retreated to their dorms, Professor Davis found himself pacing outside the custodial closet. He had suggested, rather boldly, that they meet for a brief discussion regarding the material. He checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. Precisely 11 p.m. The door creaked open, and Peabody emerged, holding a worn leather satchel. Ready when you are, Professor, he said softly. Davis led the way to his office, a chaotic sanctuary of overflowing bookshelves and scattered papers. He cleared a space on his desk, pushing aside a half-eaten sandwich and a precarious tower of journals. Right then, he said, rubbing his hands together, let's begin with Riemann's hypothesis. A fascinating problem, wouldn't you agree? Peabody nodded, his eyes already scanning the equations Davis had scribbled on the whiteboard earlier in the day. Indeed, the distribution of prime numbers is elegant in its complexity. Davis launched into an explanation, his voice gaining momentum as he delved into the intricacies of the zeta function. He expected to spend the entire night laying the groundwork, carefully guiding Peabody through the dense theoretical landscape. To his astonishment, Peabody grasped the core concepts almost immediately. He asked insightful questions, pointing out subtle nuances that Davis himself had overlooked. Within an hour, they were tackling advanced proofs, bouncing ideas off each other with an enthusiasm that belied the late hour. "Remarkable," Davis muttered, scribbling furiously on the whiteboard. "Absolutely remarkable." Peabody's mind was a sponge, soaking up knowledge with an insatiable thirst. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, painting the room in a soft, ethereal light, they finally paused. Davis, exhausted but exhilarated, leaned back in his chair. You have a gift, Mr. Peabody," he said, his voice hoarse. "A truly extraordinary gift." Peabody blushed, averting his gaze. I enjoy it, Professor." Davis stared at Peabody, a sense of profound purpose washing over him. He, Alastair Davis, had stumbled upon a hidden treasure, a mathematical mind languishing in the shadows, and he was determined to help it shine. He would nurture Peabody's talent, providing him with the resources and guidance he needed to unlock his full potential. He rose from his chair, a newfound energy coursing through his veins. "We'll meet again next week, same time," he declared. "And Mr. Peabody, please call me Alastair." He extended his hand, a gesture of camaraderie that felt surprisingly natural. Peabody shook his hand, his grip firm and steady. "Thank you, Alastair. I'll look forward to it." As Peabody left, Davis gazed around his office, no longer seeing the chaos and clutter, but a laboratory of possibilities. The world outside was still asleep, but within these walls, a quiet revolution had begun. He felt something akin to joy, a rare and precious emotion that warmed him from the inside out. He had found his purpose, not in abstract equations or theoretical proofs, but in the potential of another human being. He was going to change Peabody's life, and perhaps Peabody would change his. Whispers in the hallway. The hum of Sever Hall's fluorescent lights vibrated in the air, a jarring counterpoint to the elegant calculations Professor Davis chased. Chalk dust powdered his tweed, a testament to hours lost in equations, as he scribbled across the whiteboard. Across from him, Mr. Peabody, ever in his Navy work clothes, watched with a silent focus, a cleaning rag peeking from his rear pocket. "All right, Peabody, if we were to apply the modular form to the zeta function within the critical strip," Davis's voice faded as his mind plunged into the labyrinth of complex mathematics. Outside, a flicker of movement caught Sarah Chen's eye. The ambitious first-year graduate student, struggling with a particularly stubborn topological knot, noticed the unusual light emanating from Davis's office. The professor was known for his punctuality, a clockwork figure who departed at precisely 5. Intrigued, Sarah edged closer. The narrow opening in the door revealed Davis gesturing emphatically at the board, muttering to himself. And then she saw Peabody, not sweeping or emptying bins, but standing shoulder to shoulder with the professor, a work-worn finger tracing the equation. Sarah couldn't catch Peabody's words, but Davis's subsequent nod and widening eyes suggested something akin to reverence. A disquieting feeling settled in Sarah's stomach. The following day, whispers bloomed in the graduate lounge, mingling with the scents of stale coffee and singed popcorn. Davis's light was on late last night. Mark, perpetually caffeinated, observed. "Yeah," Sarah replied casually, stirring her drink. "He was with Peabody." "Peabody?" "The custodian." Mark arched a brow. "Doing what?" "Buffing up the axioms." A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the room. "I don't know," Sarah demurred, feigning indifference. They were at the whiteboard. It looked intense. The seed of speculation had been sown. Subsequent days brought more accounts. Davis and Peabody, closeted in the office, bent over equations, sometimes until the late hours. The whispers amplified, solidifying into rumors. "He's on some clandestine project," suggested Emily, a student known for her sharp wit. "Probably tackling P equals NP and needs a brawny assistant to carry the chalk." "No way," countered David, an inveterate optimist. "I heard Davis discovered a savant, a hidden mathematical prodigy disguised as a janitor." The rumors blossomed with each retelling, gaining a life of their own. Peabody transformed into a mythical figure, a mathematical enigma haunting Sever Hall's corridors, a silent guardian of obscure theorems. Sarah, however, remained unsatisfied with hearsay. The image of Peabody indicating the whiteboard, Davis's stunned expression, needled at her. She needed answers. One evening, as twilight painted the sky a deep violet, Sarah loitered near Davis's office, feigning absorption in a textbook, her ears straining for any scrap of conversation. The door stood ajar. Inside, Davis paced, his brow a landscape of concern. Peabody stood by the window, watching the campus fade into darkness. "The core difficulty, Peabody," Davis said, his voice tinged with frustration, "lies in the distribution of prime numbers. It's like trying to hold smoke in your hand. We require a fresh perspective, a novel approach." Peabody turned, his expression pensive. "Perhaps," he offered softly, his voice a mere breath, "we're observing the wrong tendrils of smoke." Sarah's breath hitched. The janitor was contributing insight. She leaned closer, desperate to hear more. Davis ceased his pacing, his gaze fixed on Peabody. "What do you propose, Peabody? Explain yourself." Peabody hesitated, then continued. "The primes, they aren't randomly strewn, Professor. They exhibit organization, but on an orthogonal plane, analogous to constellations, visible only from a specific vantage point." Davis gaped at Peabody, his mouth slightly ajar. The air thickened, charged with unarticulated possibilities. Sarah, plastered against the wall, felt a tremor course through her. This transcended a simple tutorial. This was momentous. A conviction resonated within her. She had to understand Peabody's knowledge, its source. The ambitious spark in her eyes rekindled, now fueled by both curiosity and a fervent yearning to participate in the groundbreaking discovery unfolding behind the partially closed door. Exposed. The faint red glow of Sarah's phone screen illuminated her face as she meticulously positioned it behind a stack of textbooks. Professor Davis was already scribbling furiously on the whiteboard, a chaotic ballet of chalk dust swirling around him. Mr. Peabody, perched on the edge of a lab stool, watched with an almost paternal gaze. Sarah pressed record. "So, Peabody, regarding the distribution of prime numbers within specific intervals," Davis began, his voice a touch louder than usual, perhaps unconsciously playing to an audience he didn't know he had. Sarah adjusted the phone slightly, ensuring optimal audio capture. She told herself it was for posterity, a digital record of a potential breakthrough. But a darker, more ambitious voice whispered in her ear, "Opportunity." The session unfolded as usual, a whirlwind of complex equations, insightful observations from Peabody delivered in his quiet, unassuming voice, and Davis's excited pronouncements punctuated by the rhythmic squeak of chalk. Sarah felt a knot of guilt tighten in her stomach, but the allure of the story was too strong. She imagined the headlines, the buzz, her name attached to the discovery. 2 days later, the university newspaper, the Crimson Quill, landed on every desk and in every hallway. The headline screamed, "Harvard professor caught the janitor solving equations at 2 a.m. What he did next shocked everyone. Below, a blurry, pixelated photo showed Davis gesturing wildly at the whiteboard, Peabody a shadowy figure in the background. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline as she watched the paper ripple through the department like wildfire. Faces contorted with disbelief, amusement, and a healthy dose of academic jealousy. She feigned surprise, joining the throng gathered around a copy of the paper, offering a carefully crafted, "Oh my God, can you believe this?" The article, penned by an eager undergraduate journalist, painted a sensationalized portrait of Davis as a mad genius and Peabody as a savant hidden in plain sight. It quoted snippets of their late-night conversations, cherry-picked from Sarah's recording, stripping them of their context and amplifying their esoteric nature. The journalist even fabricated a quote from an anonymous source claiming that Peabody was the real brains behind Davis's recent work. The story exploded. Within hours, the article was picked up by online news outlets. The headline morphed and multiplied, each iteration more outlandish than the last. Harvard janitor solves Riemann hypothesis, one screamed. Another, mathematical maverick, the genius sweeping Harvard's halls. The phone in the mathematics department rang incessantly. News crews descended upon the campus, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust into the faces of bewildered students and faculty. The hallowed halls of Harvard, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, were transformed into a chaotic media circus. Davis, oblivious as ever, was initially bemused by the commotion. He couldn't understand why so many people were suddenly interested in his work. He even, with a touch of awkward pride, showed Peabody a copy of the quill, pointing out a particularly elegant formulation he had developed. Peabody's reaction was different. He stared at the blurry photo, his face etched with a mixture of shock and fear. He mumbled something about unintended consequences and quickly excused himself, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the university. Sarah watched him go, a pang of regret piercing through her ambition. She had wanted to expose Peabody's genius, to bring him the recognition he deserved. But she had failed to consider the price. The media frenzy, the public scrutiny, it was all too much, too fast. That evening, Davis found Peabody scrubbing the floors in the deserted library. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the polished marble. "Peabody," Davis began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "About the article." Peabody stopped scrubbing and straightened up, his eyes meeting Davis's with a quiet intensity. "Professor, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure this attention is what's best." "But the work," Davis stammered. "The Riemann hypothesis, we were making progress." Peabody sighed. "Progress doesn't always need a spotlight, Professor. Sometimes the quiet hum of discovery is enough." He dipped his mop back into the bucket, the soapy water swirling around the fibers. "Some things are best left in the shadows." A second chance. The oak-paneled conference room hummed with a nervous energy. President Thompson, a woman whose smile rarely reached her eyes, tapped a manicured nail against the polished table. Around her sat the university's deans, their faces etched with varying degrees of apprehension and forced enthusiasm. "Well," Thompson began, her voice sharp, "we've certainly been handed a unique situation." She glanced at the front page of the University Gazette, Peabody's face staring back at them. The headline screamed, "Janitor cracks code? Night custodian may hold key to Riemann hypothesis." Dean Harding, from the mathematics department, cleared his throat. "The article, while sensationalized, does highlight Mr. Peabody's unusual talent." "Unusual is putting it mildly, Dean," Thompson retorted. "This could be a public relations disaster, or—" She paused, a flicker of something akin to hope in her eyes, a golden opportunity, a true rags-to-riches story. Harvard discovers hidden genius among its staff. Think of the donations. The other deans shifted, their expressions changing from worry to calculation. Dean Miller, from the business school, leaned forward. "We could offer him a scholarship, a full ride, and perhaps the research position, under Professor Davis, of course." Thompson considered this, tapping her nail again. "Risky, but the potential payoff is significant. The world loves an underdog. And think of the message it sends. Harvard, a place where anyone can achieve their dreams, regardless of their background." She steepled her fingers. "All right, draft the proposal. Make it irresistible. We need to control the narrative." Meanwhile, in the quiet solitude of his small apartment, Edgar Peabody was scrubbing a stubborn stain from his worn work boots. The radio hummed with the soothing sounds of classical music, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within him. He hadn't left his apartment since the article came out. The few times he'd peeked through the blinds, he saw reporters camped outside, their cameras glinting in the afternoon sun. A knock on the door startled him. He hesitated, then cautiously opened it a crack. Professor Davis stood there, his tie askew and a sheepish expression on his face. Behind him stood President Thompson and a phalanx of university officials. "Mr. Peabody," Thompson said, her voice surprisingly warm, "may we have a word?" Peabody, overwhelmed, could only nod and step back, allowing them to enter his humble abode. The contrast between the opulent university offices and his sparsely furnished apartment was jarring. Thompson, to her credit, didn't betray a flicker of discomfort. "Mr. Peabody," she began, after a moment of awkward silence, "the university has been deeply impressed by your mathematical abilities. We understand you have a unique talent, a gift that should be nurtured." She gestured to Dean Harding, who stepped forward holding a thick folder. "We would like to offer you a full scholarship to Harvard, covering all tuition and living expenses," Harding said, his voice unusually gentle. "Furthermore, we would like to offer you a research position, working alongside Professor Davis in the mathematics department." Peabody stared at them, his eyes wide with disbelief. He glanced at Professor Davis, who offered a small, encouraging smile. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Peabody spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "A scholarship? A research position?" He shook his head, as if trying to clear it. "But I'm just a janitor." Thompson stepped closer, her expression sincere. "Mr. Peabody, you are far more than just a janitor. You possess a rare intellect, a brilliant mind. We believe you have the potential to make groundbreaking contributions to the field of mathematics. We want to give you the opportunity to do so." Tears welled up in Peabody's eyes. He had spent years suppressing his passion, burying his dreams beneath layers of self-doubt and fear. Now, here was Harvard University offering him a second chance, a chance to finally pursue his calling. He looked at Professor Davis again, his eyes filled with gratitude. Davis simply nodded, his own eyes shining with quiet excitement. I don't know what to say," Peabody stammered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you all. I accept. I accept with all my heart." A collective sigh of relief swept through the university officials. President Thompson smiled, a genuine smile that finally reached her eyes. "Excellent, Mr. Peabody. We are thrilled to have you. Welcome to the future." Solving the unsolvable. The air in Davis's office hummed with a nervous energy, a stark contrast to the usual quiet hum of the university library nearby. Books were stacked precariously on every surface, threatening to topple at the slightest tremor. Amidst the chaos, Davis and Peabody worked, not as professor and former custodian, but as equals locked in a complex dance of numbers and ideas. "Edgar, look at this sequence," Davis said, scribbling furiously on the whiteboard that dominated one wall. His chalk dust-covered fingers flew across the surface, leaving a trail of symbols in their wake. "It seems to almost cyclical, but the period is elusive." Peabody, perched on the edge of a chair, his gaze unwavering, responded, "Professor, have you considered modular arithmetic with a prime base related to the distribution of primes near the critical line? It might reveal a hidden pattern." Davis stopped, chalk suspended in midair. "Modular arithmetic near the critical line? Peabody, you magnificent bastard." "That's it." He resumed writing, his energy renewed, muttering to himself about prime number theorems and zeta functions. Hours melted away like candle wax. They argued, debated, and challenged each other, pushing the boundaries of their understanding. Davis, usually impatient and dismissive, found himself listening intently to Peabody's insights. Peabody, in turn, shed his timidity, his voice growing stronger and more confident as he articulated complex mathematical concepts. The whiteboard filled with a sprawling tapestry of equations, a testament to their collaborative effort. Finally, as the first rays of dawn peeked through the grimy window, Davis leaned back, exhaustion etched on his face. I think I think we've done it, Edgar. We've actually done it. Peabody, equally weary but with a quiet sense of satisfaction, nodded. The proof seems sound, Professor. We've demonstrated a previously unknown relationship between the distribution of prime numbers and the zeros of the Riemann zeta function. Over the next few weeks, they meticulously refined their work, checking and rechecking every equation, every assumption, every logical leap. Davis, despite his initial excitement, harbored a deep-seated fear of being wrong. He'd dedicated his life to this problem, and the thought of publishing a flawed proof was unbearable. Peabody, surprisingly, was the more grounded of the two, offering reassurance and a fresh perspective whenever Davis's anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. The day they submitted their paper to the Annals of Mathematics felt surreal. Davis hit the send button with trembling fingers, a mixture of hope and dread swirling within him. They waited. The silence was deafening. Weeks turned into months. Davis became increasingly agitated, snapping at his graduate students and retreating further into his mathematical world. Peabody, sensing his mentor's distress, tried to distract him, suggesting walks in the Harvard gardens or discussions about obscure mathematical puzzles. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the email arrived. Davis stared at the subject line, his heart pounding in his chest. Acceptance of manuscript. He read the email aloud, his voice shaking, then reread it and again. The reviewers praised their rigor, their originality, and the potential impact of their work on the field of number theory. The news spread like wildfire. The mathematical community erupted in a frenzy of excitement and debate. Seminars were organized, conferences were planned, and mathematicians from around the world clamored to understand Davis and Peabody's groundbreaking proof. Davis, thrust into the spotlight, found himself uncomfortable and overwhelmed. He stammered during interviews, struggled to articulate his ideas to a wider audience, and longed for the quiet solitude of his office. Peabody, on the other hand, handled the attention with grace and humility. He spoke eloquently about the beauty and elegance of mathematics, inspiring a new generation of students to pursue their passions. The pinnacle of their achievement came at the International Congress of Mathematicians, where they jointly presented their work to a packed auditorium. Davis, initially terrified, found strength in Peabody's presence. Together, they navigated the complex presentation, answering questions with clarity and precision. The standing ovation they received at the end was deafening, a testament to their extraordinary collaboration. As the applause subsided, Davis turned to Peabody, a rare smile gracing his lips. "We solved the unsolvable, Edgar. Together." Peabody smiled back, his eyes twinkling. "Indeed, Professor. Indeed, we did. Beyond the equations." The concert hall buzzed, a glittering hive of intellectual luminaries and philanthropic heavyweights. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on the expectant faces, a sea of black ties and elegant gowns. Alastair Davis, tucked away in a corner seat, felt profoundly out of place. He adjusted his slightly askew bow tie for what felt like the 100th time, the scratchy wool a minor irritant compared to the emotional turmoil churning within him. He hadn't wanted to come. Public events were, to put it mildly, not his forte. But Edgar had insisted. On stage, the presenter, a renowned mathematician with a voice that boomed even without a microphone, was nearing the crescendo of his introduction. A mind that has redefined our understanding of prime numbers, a testament to the power of collaboration and the boundless potential within each of us. Davis swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He knew what was coming. Then the name echoed through the hall. Dr. Edgar Peabody. The applause was deafening. Davis watched, a strange mix of pride and disbelief swirling within him, as Edgar walked onto the stage. Gone was the unassuming custodian in his worn overalls. In his place stood a confident, respected mathematician, clad in a tailored suit that fit him impeccably. The transformation was remarkable, a testament not just to Edgar's inherent brilliance, but also to his unwavering dedication. Edgar approached the podium, a warm smile gracing his face. He paused, letting the applause wash over him before raising a hand for silence. The room quieted, all eyes fixed on him. "Thank you," he began, his voice clear and resonant. "This is humbling. To be recognized by such esteemed colleagues is an honor I never dreamed possible." He spoke eloquently about the beauty of mathematics, the elegance of the Riemann hypothesis, the thrill of the chase. Davis found himself captivated, even though he knew the science intimately. Edgar had a way of making it accessible, of igniting a passion even in those who didn't fully understand the complexities. Then, Edgar's tone shifted, becoming more personal. "But this award," he said, his gaze sweeping across the audience, "isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's ever been told they're not good enough, for everyone whose potential has been overlooked, for everyone who's dared to dream beyond their circumstances." He paused again, his eyes twinkling with emotion. Davis felt a lump forming in his throat. "And it's especially for one person," Edgar continued, his gaze now fixed directly on Davis. "Professor Alastair Davis. Alastair, if you're out there." He scanned the crowd until his eyes locked with Davis's. "Thank you. You saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. You took a chance on a janitor with equations scribbled on his lunch breaks. You opened doors, provided guidance, and most importantly, you believed." The applause erupted again, louder this time, and Davis felt his cheeks flush. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows, but he knew he couldn't. He stood up, offering a small, awkward wave. Edgar smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that conveyed more than words ever could. The rest of his speech blurred for Davis. He heard snippets about collaboration, perseverance, and the importance of mentorship, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying their journey together. He remembered the initial skepticism, the late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee, the breakthroughs and the setbacks. He recalled his own anxieties, his fear of failure, and how Edgar's quiet confidence had steadied him. Later, at the reception, Edgar was surrounded by well-wishers. Davis lingered on the periphery, content to observe. He watched as Edgar patiently answered questions, signed autographs, and posed for photographs. He noticed how Edgar made each person feel seen, valued. He was no longer just a mathematician. He was an inspiration. Finally, Edgar excused himself and approached Davis. "Alastair," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Davis shook his hand, his voice hoarse. "You deserved it, Edgar. Every bit of it." Edgar smiled. "We deserved it, Alastair. It was a team effort." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the reception fading into the background. "You know," Davis said, his gaze fixed on the swirling champagne in his glass, "I used to think that my purpose was to unlock the secrets of the universe, to solve the unsolvable. But I was wrong." He looked up at Edgar, his eyes filled with a newfound clarity. "My purpose was to help you unlock yours." Edgar placed a hand on Davis's shoulder, a gesture of warmth and gratitude. "You did more than that, Alastair. You taught me that potential can be found anywhere, in anyone. And you taught me the true meaning of collaboration. But more than that, you reminded me of the joy of mathematics, the beauty that I had almost forgotten." Davis smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. He had spent his life chasing abstract equations, searching for answers in the cold, hard logic of numbers. But in Edgar Peabody, he had found something far more profound, a connection, a purpose, and a friendship that transcended the equations. He finally understood that the greatest discoveries weren't always found in textbooks or research papers, but in the unexpected places and in the people you least expect.